Hi there. Today we're here to talk about our recent journal article in Violence Against Women titled Maybe She Was Provoked, Exploring Gender Stereotypes About Male and Female Perpetrators of Intimate Partner Violence. I'm Dr. Matthew Savage, and this is my colleague,
Dr. Jennifer Scarduzio.
We work at the University of Kentucky, and we'd also like to acknowledge our co-authors on this article and research team members, Dr. Kelly Carlyle, who's at VCU, and Dr. Kate Lockwood Harris, who's at the University of Missouri. Today we're going to tell you a little bit about a recent article that we published that examined perceptions of male and female perpetrators. In the particular study, we worked with journalists to create a composite news story that manipulated the sex of the perpetrator and the severity of violence in the story. This study uses responses from 6 open-ended questions that followed the experimental methodology. In total, there were 296 participants from a large public university, and across each of the questions that we asked, between 57 and 74% of the respondents answered those questions. Those responses were coded to respond to address 3 research questions. They're there for you on the screen, and Dr. Scarduzio will tell you a little bit more about them as she discusses the results of our study.
So our first research question asked, in what ways do perceptions of male and female perpetrators of IPV differ? And what we found was, first of all, that participants were likely to give male perpetrators a much more rigid description of what was within the bounds of masculinity. So when a male perpetrator was portrayed as hitting a woman, or when a male was portrayed as being a victim, they were described as being outside of the bounds of normative masculinity. Whereas when a female perpetrator engaged in violence, she was described as being excessively feminine or overly connected to femininity. In regard to our second research question, which asked what gendered stereotypes are present in the perceptions of male and female perpetrators, we found 4 different types of stereotypes that we identified and named. And the first type was aggression stereotypes. That related to the type of violence that the perpetrator used, whether it was physical, verbal, or emotional violence. The second type of stereotype was an emotionality stereotype, and that was emotional reasons or what we're calling attributions for the behavior of the stereotype. The third type was power and control stereotypes, and those related to the desire to control victims, and also the actual descriptions participants gave for the physical size and strength of the perpetrator. And then finally, we had acceptability of violence stereotypes, which is stereotypes about when the violence was perpetrated and by whom it was perpetrated in terms of who was viewed as acceptable, if it was a female or male perpetrator. Importantly, each stereotype reflected, and in some cases challenged, dominant United States gender norms, which is what led us to our third and final research question. Our third research question asked, how do these stereotypes reflect or challenge United States gender norms? In regard to emotionality and attributions, we found some really interesting findings.
That we did.
First, in terms of emotionality, we found that male perpetrators were often portrayed as emotionally one-dimensional, whereas female perpetrators were often portrayed as multidimensional in terms of emotionality or overly, excessively emotional. And this is important and adds to the research because in past research, men are often portrayed as being rational, while women are portrayed as being emotional. But we found that participants perceive that both men and women can be emotional, just in different ways. In regard to attributions, we found that they provided more internal attributions for male perpetrators, such as they have anger management issues. And this is troubling because portraying or perceiving that an abusive man has anger management issues kind of ignores the fact that a lot of male perpetrators use their emotion in a skillful way to manipulate the victims. And then finally, female perpetrators, they often gave external attributions for their behavior or external reasons, such as they were provoked, meaning that either the male in the situation or in the relationship provoked the female perpetrator to act the way that she did, or she was acting in self-defense. So in regard to control, participants viewed male-perpetrated violence as more stable over time, and that female perpetrators often had less control in the relationship. And this relates to other research similar that Stark has done in regard to concerted control. Now Matt's going to talk about some of our practical implications and who should really care about this research.
So there are lots of people that should really care. The first are academics who are doing active research on this topic because our findings contribute to theory on the issue. But one of the other groups who would be motivated to learn more about these different stereotypes that operate in intimate partner violence when taking into consideration of both male and female perpetrators is journalists, and also the service providers who work to help victims of intimate partner violence. There are opportunities here to contribute to prevention and response efforts, and also to adjust the framing of news stories to recognize larger themes of intimate partner violence as opposed to focusing on episodic or episode-specific details of a particular incident. In doing so, we can be more cognizant of attitudes toward male and female victims and promote a public health understanding of intimate partner violence that recognizes societal level contributions that we can all make to address this important issue. Thank you.
Thank you.